My name is Helen, I'm 70 years old, and my own son screamed at me to stop wasting his money in front of our entire family. Before I tell you how I legally drained his inheritance and every last dime from his bank accounts, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The Texas sun was warm on my shoulders that Saturday afternoon. The air smelled of hickory smoke from the grill and freshly cut grass. It was supposed to be a happy day. A casual barbecue at my son Mark's house in the suburbs of Oak Creek. His work friends were there, their wives chatting by the pool, their kids laughing and chasing each other across the lawn. It was the picture of the perfect American family, and for a moment I let myself believe in it. I had spent the morning in the kitchen, the one they always reminded me was their kitchen, baking my specialty, a deep dish apple pie from a recipe my own mother had taught me. The smell of cinnamon and baked apples always felt like love to me. I carried it out to the patio table, my hands wrinkled with age, steadying the heavy ceramic dish. "Oh, another treat from our expensive kitchen," my daughter-in-law Jessica said. Her voice was just loud enough for the women nearest to her to hear. A sweet-sounding poison dart. I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. I'd been living with them for 6 months, and that knot had become a permanent resident. I forced a smile, pretending I hadn't heard, and set the pie down next to the potato salad. But Mark had heard. He'd had a few too many beers and it had made him brave or maybe just cruel. He walked over from the grill, spatula in hand, a thundercloud gathering on his face. He didn't lower his voice. He wanted an audience. "Did you hear her?" he asked, jabbing the spatula in my direction. "Jessica's right. Stop wasting my money, old woman. That oven of yours is racking up the electricity bill." The world went silent. The laughter of the children seemed to freeze mid-air. The casual chatter of the adults died in their throats. Every pair of eyes on that patio, friends, neighbors, strangers, darted away from me, suddenly finding intense interest in their paper plates, their shoes, the clouds in the sky. No one would meet my gaze. The shame was a physical thing, a hot blanket smothering me. Old woman. He hadn't called me mom. He had called me a burden. My blood ran cold. This was my son. The boy whose scraped knees I had kissed, whose fevers I had nursed through the night. The young man whose college fund I had built by working 16-hour days at my bakery after his father passed. I had sold that beloved bakery, my life's work, to have a comfortable retirement, and I had given them a substantial part of that money to help with the house. A house my name was also on. I didn't say a word. I didn't cry. I simply turned and walked back into the house, each step feeling like I was wading through thick mud. I could feel their stares on my back, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. I locked the door to my room. In that crushing silence, something inside me didn't just break. It hardened. It turned to steel. They thought I was just a weak, forgetful old woman they could push around. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had forgotten who paid for their lavish wedding, who co-signed on their mortgage when the bank wouldn't, who built a life from nothing but flour, sugar, and sheer force of will. My eyes scanned the room, their room that they had so graciously allowed me to occupy. And then I saw it. Tucked away in the bottom of my closet was the old leather briefcase I hadn't opened in years. It held the final papers from my business. I knelt down, my old bones protesting, and pulled it out. The latches clicked open with a sound that echoed in the silent room. Inside, beneath old tax returns and supplier invoices, was a faded manila folder. The label, written in my own hand from years ago, was still clear. Helen's Sweet Treats LLC business accounts in finalization. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the flap. I sifted through the documents, my heart beginning to beat a little faster. It was a long shot, a half-forgotten memory. But then I found it, the final agreement with the bank for the business's primary checking account. An account I had kept open on Mark's advice, to handle any lingering expenses or tax issues. An account he had later started using for his own consulting business. My eyes landed on the two names listed as joint account holders, Helen Miller and Mark Miller. And that's when I picked up the phone. Before I made that phone call, before the steel entered my soul on that patio, I was just a mother. A widow, yes, and a business owner, but first and foremost a mother. My husband, Robert, was taken from me by a sudden heart attack when Mark was just 10. I remember that night like a photograph burned into my mind. The flashing red and blue lights painting frantic streaks across our living room walls, the cold, final sound of the ambulance doors closing. In that moment, the world shrank to just two people. Me and my boy. My universe collapsed into his small, tear-streaked face. And I made him a silent promise right there, with the scent of antiseptic and tragedy in the air. I would be both father and mother. He would never want for anything. He would never feel the sting of lack or the fear of insecurity. That promise became the fuel that burned in my veins for the next 30 years. I took our small savings, every penny Robert and I had scraped together, and poured it into a dream. A bakery. Helen's Sweet Treats. It started in a tiny rented storefront on a forgotten side street, with a second-hand oven that ran too hot and my grandmother's recipes scribbled on now yellowed index cards. The first few years were a brutal, flour-dusted blur. My alarm went off at 3 a.m. I'd be in the bakery by 3:30. My hands plunged into mountains of cool, soft dough, the yeasty, sweet scent of potential a permanent part of me. I remember Mark as a little boy, sometimes sleeping on a cot I kept in the back office, waking up and helping me by getting more flour on himself than in the mixing bowl. I'd finish the morning bake, run the counter all day with a smile plastered on my face, and spend my evenings hunched over paperwork at my kitchen table, often falling asleep right there, my cheek sticking to an invoice. Every spare dollar, every ounce of energy went to Mark. Piano lessons, summer camps, the best clothes I could afford so he wouldn't be teased at school. When it came time for college, I didn't hesitate for a second. His dream was the University of Texas, and the tuition was staggering. I walked into the bank, the same bank that had given me my first small business loan, and I refinanced the bakery. I took on a mountain of debt that terrified me in the dead of night, all to ensure he could walk onto that campus without the crushing weight of a student loan. His entire college fund was built on my sleepless nights and aching back. I wanted him to have the life Robert and I had dreamed of for him. I wanted him to get a good job, a big promotion, a life without the constant grinding struggle I knew so intimately. And he did. He graduated with honors. He met Jessica in his senior year. The first time he brought her home, I saw her eyes sweep over my small, modest house. I saw the way she looked at my worn-out apron, the faint, polite wrinkle of her nose. She was polished, ambitious, from a family with money, a stark contrast to my flour-dusted reality. I tried to like her, I truly did, for Mark's sake. But from the beginning there was a chill, a subtle condescension in her voice when she'd ask about the bakery, as if it were a quaint little hobby. After I finally retired and sold the bakery for a sum that was meant to be my nest egg for a peaceful old age, they descended. They sat me down in my own living room, the one Robert and I had painted together, and they laid out their plan. "Mom, we've been so worried about you," Mark started, his voice thick with a counterfeit concern. "All alone in this big house. The upkeep, the property taxes. It's too much for one person. We want you to be with family," Jessica chimed in, placing her perfectly manicured cold hand over mine. "We have that beautiful guest suite in the basement. It has its own bathroom. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. We can finally take care of you." It sounded like an answer to a prayer I didn't even know I had. To be close to my son, my only family. To be a real grandmother someday. So I agreed. I sold my home, the place filled with the ghost of Robert's laughter, and I did something incredibly foolish. I gave them a significant portion of the proceeds. "To help with renovations and expenses, Mom," Mark had said, his eyes shining with sincerity. "Think of it as an investment in our future together. This will be your home too." The guest suite was a small, finished bedroom and a bathroom in the basement. It was nice enough, but it was a basement. It was a gilded cage. From the first week, the unspoken but rigid rules began to emerge. My morning routine of baking a small batch of scones was met with passive-aggressive comments from Jessica about the lingering smell. "We're trying to keep a very clean, modern aesthetic, Helen," she'd say, wrinkling her nose. "The smell of butter is a bit heavy." I started contributing financially almost immediately, buying my own groceries and insisting on paying a portion of the utilities, just to feel less like a parasite in their home. But it was never enough. If I bought organic milk, Jessica would comment on the needless expense. If I bought regular milk, she'd sigh dramatically about the hormones. Mark was the biggest heartbreak. He became a ghost. He'd come home from work, give me a cursory "Hey, Mom," and disappear with Jessica into their wing of the house. Our conversations, once the highlight of my day, became clipped and superficial. When I tried to talk to him, to gently broach the subject of the growing tension with Jessica, he'd wave it away with an impatient hand. "That's just Jess, Mom. She's just stressed with her high-pressure job. Don't take it so personally." But it was personal. It was a slow, methodical erosion of my place in the family, of my very identity. I went from being Helen Miller, proud owner of Helen's Sweet Treats, a respected member of my community, to just the old woman in the basement. I had walked willingly into that cage, believing it was a sanctuary built of love. But after that day at the barbecue, with his cruel words still ringing in my ears like a death knell, I finally understood. It wasn't a sanctuary. It was a holding pen. And they had no idea that the quiet woman in the basement was the one who had built the whole damn farm. They thought I was their dependent, but the truth was they had been depending on me, on my money, on my sacrifice their entire lives. And the key to that cage wasn't on the outside. It was right here in a dusty old folder in my own 2 hands. The weeks leading up to that fateful barbecue were a masterclass in psychological warfare, executed with a chilling domestic precision by my daughter-in-law. It wasn't one big dramatic blow. It was a death by 1,000 tiny cuts, each one designed to make me feel smaller, more insignificant, more of a burden. It started with my things, the few precious items I'd brought with me from my old house that represented my history, my marriage, my identity. The first to go was the old rocking chair that had belonged to my mother. It was a beautiful hand-carved piece of solid oak, worn smooth in all the right places. I'd rocked Mark to sleep in that chair, humming lullabies as I breathed in the sweet scent of his baby hair. It was more than wood and varnish. It was a vessel of memories. One afternoon I came downstairs from my room, and it was gone from its corner in the living room. A sleek, uncomfortable-looking metal and leather chair stood in its place. I found my mother's rocker shoved in a damp corner of the basement storage area, a box of old winter coats thrown on top of it like it was trash. "Oh, that old thing?" Jessica said when I asked, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard without missing a beat. She didn't even look at me. "It just didn't fit the room's energy. It's so dated. Don't worry, it's safe down there." The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. It wasn't just a chair. It was my mother, it was my baby boy, it was my history, and she had dismissed it like a piece of junk. I didn't argue. I just went downstairs and quietly covered it with an old sheet, a silent funeral shroud. The next assault was on something even more precious. A few weeks later I was looking for my recipe box. It was a simple, worn wooden box, the lid slightly warped, stained with vanilla and cocoa over the decades. Inside were dozens of handwritten cards, some in my mother's elegant, looping cursive, some in my own hurried script. It was my Bible, the heart of my bakery, the legacy I had planned to pass down. It wasn't on its usual shelf in the kitchen. My stomach clenched with a cold, sickening dread. I searched everywhere. Cupboards, drawers, even my own room, thinking I might have misplaced it. Finally, heart pounding, I approached Jessica as she was watering her orchids. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Jessica, dear, have you seen my little wooden recipe box?" She looked at me, a perfect little picture of innocence. A practiced, blank expression. "A box? Oh, the little wooden one? I think I saw that during my spring cleaning frenzy last week. It looked so old and grimy. I thought it was just some old trash you'd forgotten about. Honestly, Helen, it was falling apart. I'm pretty sure it went out with the recycling on Tuesday." Trash. The word came out as a strangled whisper. "Jessica, those were my mother's. They were everything." She just shrugged, turning her attention back to her precious flowers. "Honestly, Helen, who even uses handwritten recipes anymore? You can find everything on the internet. It's so much more efficient." That night I cried. I sat on the edge of my bed in my basement room, the house silent above me, and wept for the loss of my mother's handwriting, for the years of tradition and love that had just been tossed away like common garbage. I thought at that moment that was the lowest she could sink. I was so naive. Her next move was designed to systematically cut me off from the outside world. My next-door neighbor, Carol, was a lovely woman in her late 70s, a widow like myself. We had struck up a friendship, often chatting over the back fence while we tended to our small container gardens. She was a lifeline, a connection to a world where I wasn't just Mark's mother. One afternoon she came to the front door holding a small, beautiful bouquet of roses from her garden. A simple, kind gesture. I heard the doorbell and started to get up from the living room sofa, but Jessica, who had been in the kitchen, swooped past me, a bright, false smile on her face. I stood in the hallway just out of sight and listened. "Oh, Carol, how sweet of you. They're beautiful." Jessica's voice was pure sugar, the voice she used for company. "They're for your mother-in-law," I heard Carol say warmly. I thought they might brighten her day. There was a slight pause. Then Jessica's voice dropped to a conspiratorial, concerned whisper. "That is so thoughtful. But you know, Helen is resting right now. She's been a bit confused lately. Her memory isn't what it used to be. The doctor says she needs a lot of quiet time. Not too much stimulation." I stood frozen, my hand flying to my mouth. She was painting me as a senile, feeble old woman to my only friend. "Oh my," Carol said, her voice filled with alarm. I had no idea. "Please tell her I was thinking of her." "Of course I will," Jessica lied smoothly. "And I'll make sure she gets these." The door clicked shut. I watched through the hallway opening as Jessica walked directly to the kitchen. Didn't even bother putting the beautiful roses in water, and dropped the entire bouquet, stems and all, directly into the trash can under the sink. She looked up and saw me standing there. She held my gaze for a long moment, a flicker of triumph in her eyes before turning away. The message was crystal clear. "You are my prisoner. Your connections to the outside world go through me, and I can sever them at will." From then on, the isolation intensified. The Wi-Fi password was suddenly changed. "We got a new, more secure router," Mark mumbled when I asked, refusing to meet my eye. The house thermostat was permanently set to a frigid 65 degrees. An Arctic temperature for my old bones. When I tried to adjust it, it would be turned back down within the hour. I started wearing sweaters and thick socks indoors, a constant, shivering reminder that this was not my home and my comfort was not a consideration. This was the atmosphere in the weeks before the barbecue. It was a house filled with a suffocating, silent hostility. I was being systematically erased, my possessions discarded, my friendships sabotaged, my health disregarded. They weren't just making me feel unwelcome. They were trying to break my spirit. They were trying to make me believe their narrative, that I was a confused, burdensome old woman who should be grateful for whatever scraps of kindness they threw my way. And it was almost working. But then came Mark's public humiliation. That final brutal push. And in that moment he and Jessica made a fatal error. They didn't break me. They woke me up. The morning after the barbecue was eerily, unnaturally quiet. The house itself seemed to be holding its breath, heavy with the unspoken ugliness of the previous day. Mark and Jessica were already gone, off to some boozy Sunday brunch with the same friends who had so studiously examined their shoelaces while my son flayed me with his words. I was alone, and the silence was a physical presence. I made my way upstairs to the kitchen, my body aching with a weariness that went bone deep, a fatigue of the soul. All I wanted was a cup of tea, a small simple ritual to anchor me in the wreckage of my life. I reached for the handle of the pantry door to get a tea bag, and my hand stopped midair, hovering. There it was. A small shiny silver padlock. It wasn't a heavy-duty lock, but it didn't need to be. Its power was symbolic. It was clipped through the two silver handles of the pantry cabinets, securing them shut with a finality that was breathtaking in its pettiness. A padlock. In a home where I was supposed to be family. A home where I paid for more than half of the groceries inside that very pantry. It was so childish, so insulting, it was almost laughable. Almost. Taped to the gleaming stainless steel of the refrigerator was a note in Jessica's perfect, loopy, passive-aggressive handwriting. To keep things organized and help with our new budgeting plan, please just ask before taking anything from the pantry. Thanks. Smiley face. The smiley face was the most enraging part. It was a cheerful little mask on an act of pure malice. She was disguising her cruelty as domestic efficiency. I didn't rattle the lock. I didn't tear down the note. I just stood there on the cool tile floor and stared at it. This little piece of metal was a declaration. It was a verdict. Said, "You have no rights here. You are not trusted. You are a child who must ask for permission to have a biscuit with her tea." That's when the dam inside me, the one that had been cracking and groaning under the pressure for months, finally broke. But it wasn't a flood of tears. It wasn't a wave of despair. It was a flood of something else entirely. Something cold and clear and diamond hard. The hurt, the sadness, the endless confusion. It all washed away in an instant, leaving behind a bedrock of pure, unadulterated anger. An anger so clean and focused it felt like a superpower. I turned without a word and walked back down the stairs to my room in the basement. I didn't sit and stew in my misery. I sat on the edge of my bed and I thought. I replayed the last 6 months with a new terrifying clarity. Every slight, every dismissive comment, every act of calculated cruelty. And then I went further back. I thought about the sale of my bakery. I thought about the financial arrangements I had made, the trust one had placed in my son. My mind, which Jessica had so kindly suggested to our neighbor was failing, was suddenly sharper than a chef's knife. And then it hit me. A memory hazy at first, then coming into sharp focus like an old photograph developing in a darkroom. The business account. Helen's Sweet Treats LLC. When I sold the bakery, the deal was complex. There were lingering payments to suppliers, tax implications that would stretch into the next fiscal year. My lawyer and my accountant had strongly advised me to keep the primary LLC business account open for at least a year to handle it all smoothly. I remembered the meeting at the bank clearly now. Mark was there. He had insisted on coming, on helping his old mom navigate all this confusing paperwork. He had been so helpful, so charming. He had suggested that since he was helping me manage the final stages, his name should remain on the account as a joint holder for convenience, so he could sign checks or make transfers if I was unavailable. I, in my trusting, foolish maternal love, had readily agreed. After all the bakery's affairs were finally settled, the account still had a healthy 6-figure sum in it. My nest egg, the profits from 40 years of my life's work. Mark then came to me with another brilliant idea. Mom, why close it? That's just a hassle. Let's just transition it. You know I'm starting that small consulting business on the side. We can use this account. It's already established with a good history. It'll be our venture. Our venture. I had been so proud I thought my heart would burst. My son, the entrepreneur, wanting to partner with his old mom. I'd let him take the lead. Over time I'd stopped looking at the statements. I trusted him completely. I assumed the money was his seed capital, a generous loan from his mother that he was growing into something new and successful. He and Jessica certainly lived like his business was booming. I scrambled to the closet and pulled out that old leather briefcase. My hands were shaking now, but with adrenaline, not weakness. I found the faded manila folder. Helen's Sweet Treats LLC business accounts and finalization. There it was. The original bank agreement, a thick sheaf of papers. I flipped through them until I found the signature page. A joint account. To access or make major changes, it required only one of the 2 listed signatories. And my name, Helen Miller, was listed first. Primary account holder. They had been living a lie. A grand, opulent lie funded by my flour-dusted hands and my aching back. The fancy car, the expensive vacations, the designer clothes, Jessica's so-called promotion to a life of leisure. It was all an illusion. An illusion paid for by the confused old woman they had just locked out of her own pantry. They thought the padlock on the pantry was a symbol of their power, their total control. They had no idea. The real key wasn't to the pantry. It was to their entire fraudulent life. And I was holding it in my hand. They thought they had all the control, all the power, all the money. But they had forgotten one crucial fatal detail. I was the one who had built the goddamn casino. And the house was about to go bust. With the bank document clutched in my hand like a holy scripture, I felt a surge of energy I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't the tired ache of a 70-year-old woman. This was the focused, humming energy of a CEO about to execute a hostile takeover. I walked over to the small desk in the corner of my room and fired up my old laptop. It whirred to life slowly, its fan protesting its age, but it worked. The house Wi-Fi password had been changed, a petty act of control, but they had forgotten that I still paid the bill for my own cell phone, which had a hotspot feature. A small but critical oversight on their part. Their first of many. My fingers, usually stiff in the mornings, flew across the keyboard, typing in the bank's web address from memory. I entered the login details for the old business account. My heart a steady rhythmic drum against my ribs. The security questions popped up on the screen, a digital gatekeeper. What was the name of your first pet? Trixie, I typed. What city were you married in? San Antonio. Questions only I could answer. Questions about a life, a history I'd lived long before Mark and Jessica had written me off as a relic. The page loaded. The familiar blue and white of the bank's online portal. I clicked on the account summary. My breath caught in my throat. The balance was still substantial. Enough to live on, certainly. But it was a fraction of what it should have been. A sick, hollow feeling churned in my stomach. I clicked on View Statements. I went back a year. Then 2. Then 3. It was a digital ledger of their betrayal. A bloodbath in pixels and numbers. My life's work, my retirement, my security. It had been treated as their personal bottomless slush fund. I scrolled through the transactions one after another. A litany of their breathtaking greed. I saw the down payment on Mark's gleaming, obnoxious sports car. I saw thousands of dollars hemorrhaging at high-end department stores, Neiman Marcus, Saks Fifth Avenue. There was a charge for over $8,000 at a Four Seasons resort in Maui. Dated the same week they told me they couldn't afford to call a plumber to fix the constantly dripping faucet in my basement bathroom. Just put a bucket under it, Mom, Mark had said. There were charges for five-star restaurants where a single meal cost more than my entire weekly budget. There were hefty monthly dues for Mark's exclusive golf club. There was a recurring payment to a high-end wine of the month club that delivered cases of expensive French wine to their door. And then I saw the checks. The bank had scanned digital images of every cleared check. My blood ran cold. One was made out to Jessica's sister's alma mater, a donation, for an amount that suspiciously matched the cost of a semester's tuition. A bribe thinly veiled as philanthropy, to get their niece into college. Another was a large sum paid to an interior designer, the one who had declared my mother's rocking chair dated. They were using my money to erase my legacy, both literally and figuratively. The rage that had been simmering inside me for months finally boiled over. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was the absolute staggering betrayal. The sheer sociopathic audacity of it. They had me living in their basement, feeling guilty for using an extra tea bag, while they were jet-setting and renovating and bribing their way through life on my dime. Mark's voice from the barbecue echoed in my head, dripping with venom. Stop wasting my money, old woman. My money. The irony was so bitter it tasted like acid in the back of my throat. I didn't hesitate. My actions were now stripped of all emotion except for a cold, clear purpose. I looked up the number for the bank's business premier services line. It was a direct line, one that bypassed the usual automated menus and hold music. A perk for high-value accounts. A perk I had earned with 40 years of 3 a.m. wake-up calls. A polite, professional voice answered on the second ring. Premier Business Banking, this is David. How can I help you? I took a deep, steadying breath. My voice when it came out was the voice of Helen Miller, CEO. It was calm, firm, and utterly devoid of weakness. Hello, David. My name is Helen Miller. I am the primary account holder and co-founder of the LLC account for Helen's Sweet Treats. Account number ending in 4-7-2-9. I heard the soft, rapid click of his keyboard. Yes, Mrs. Miller. I see your account here. How can I assist you today? I need to report extensive unauthorized activity and secure my assets immediately, I said, my voice like ice. I need you to perform 3 actions, effective immediately. First, I want to freeze all outgoing transactions from this account. No checks, no wires, no ACH transfers. Nothing goes out. Lock it down. Okay, ma'am. I can place a temporary administrative freeze on the account right now. It's not temporary, I corrected him, my tone leaving no room for debate. Second, I need you to revoke all access privileges, both digital and physical, for the other signatory on this account, Mark Miller. That includes his debit card, his online access, his check writing privileges, and any automatic payments linked to his credentials. There was a brief, pregnant pause on the other end of the line. I see, ma'am. As the primary account holder, you have that authority. I am processing that revocation now. His credentials will be deactivated within the next 5 minutes. Thank you, David, I said. And third, and most importantly, I want you to initiate a wire transfer for the entire remaining balance of this account into a new individual checking account, under my name and my name only. I will provide my social security number and any other verification you need to open it right now. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. This was not a routine call. I provided all the information he asked for, answering security questions flawlessly, reciting numbers from memory. He placed me on a brief hold. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of my own steady, even breathing. He came back on the line a few minutes later, his voice now tinged with a new respect. "All right, Mrs. Miller. It's done. The freeze is in place. Mr. Miller's access has been completely and permanently revoked. The wire transfer of the full balance to your new sole owner account has been initiated. It should be complete within the hour. Is there anything else I can do for you?" "No, David," I said. "You've done more than enough." I hung up the phone. I leaned back in my creaky desk chair and stared at the blank laptop screen. The first domino had fallen. It wasn't just a domino. It was the cornerstone of their entire fraudulent empire. And I was about to take a sledgehammer to the rest of the foundation. This wasn't just about getting my money back. This was about justice. This was about taking back my life. The adrenaline from the phone call with the bank was a powerful current, and I let it carry me to the next task. Reclaiming my stolen inheritance was just the defense. Now it was time to go on the offense. My mind, clear and sharp, was a flurry of activity, connecting dots I had foolishly ignored for months. Every utility, every luxury, every service that made their comfortable, condescending life possible. I had a hand in it somewhere. They had woven me into the fabric of their finances for their own convenience, using my good credit and my stable history as their personal safety net. And now I was going to pull on every single thread until the whole thing unraveled into a pathetic, tangled mess. I went back to the old leather briefcase, my movements now methodical and precise. I wasn't just looking for bank statements anymore. I was looking for contracts, agreements, any piece of paper with my signature on it, a signature they had taken for granted. And then I found the big one, the thick, intimidating stack of closing documents for the house. I spread the papers across my small desk, the sharp legalistic smell of them filling the air. My eyes, which they probably thought were too old to read fine print, scanned the legalese until I found the deed. And there it was, in crisp official black and white, legally recorded with Travis County. Tenants in common: Mark Miller, Jessica Miller, and Helen Miller. A memory flooded back. The day at the mortgage broker's office. The look of panic on Mark's face when the broker explained that their debt-to-income ratio was too high, that the bank wouldn't approve the loan on their own. I was their solution, their savior. I had to put down a larger portion of the down payment from the sale of my own home and co-sign on the loan. In return, my name was put on the deed as a one-third owner. They probably thought it was just a formality, a piece of paper to satisfy the lender. They had forgotten that in the state of Texas, a tenant in common has the absolute legal right to force the sale of the property. It's called a partition sale, a legal maneuver to allow a co-owner to cash out their equity. It's a legal bulldog. I remembered a business card I'd been given a few months back by a real estate agent at a neighborhood block party, back when I was still allowed to speak to people. A sharp, ambitious woman named Brenda. I found the card tucked into a side pocket of my wallet. I dialed the number, my finger firm on the keypad. Brenda Carlisle speaking. "Hello, Brenda. My name is Helen Miller. We met a few months ago at the Oak Creek block party. I'm a co-owner of the property at 124 Oak Creek Lane. I need to sell it. Urgently." There was a surprised pause. "Helen, of course I remember you. Sell? That's sudden. Are Mark and Jessica on board with this?" "It doesn't matter if they are," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument or negotiation. "I am exercising my legal right as a co-owner to initiate a partition sale. I will be filing the motion with my lawyer tomorrow. I need you to draw up the listing agreement. I want it on the market by the end of the week. I want an aggressive price for a quick sale. I want this done." Brenda was a professional. She heard the steel in my voice and recognized a motivated seller when she heard one. There was no hesitation now. Okay, Helen. I understand. I can have the necessary paperwork sent to your email within the hour. We'll need to schedule a photographer to take pictures for the listing. Schedule it for tomorrow morning, I said. The house will be ready. I hung up. Checkmate move number 2. The ground beneath their feet was about to become a hot commodity on Zillow. Next, I turned my attention to the monthly bills, the lifeblood of their modern convenience. For simplicity, Mark had set up all the household utilities to be paid automatically from a high-rewards credit card. A credit card that was, of course, linked to the joint business account as the primary payment method. The same account that now had a balance of $0.00. I went online, a digital warrior in a floral nightgown. The city's utility portal for water and electricity. The internet provider. The cable company with their premium package. One by one I found the accounts. I didn't just change the payment method. That would be too subtle. I canceled the services entirely. Reason for cancellation? The online form for the internet company asked. I typed with grim satisfaction. Property owner has ceased requiring service at this location. Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max, Spotify Premium. A ridiculously expensive subscription for a meal kit delivery service that sent them pre-portioned gourmet ingredients twice a week. All linked to that same card. Cancel. 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 I imagine Jessica, settling onto her $1,000 sofa after a long day of, well, whatever she did, ready to watch her favorite reality show, only to find a blank screen with a stark, unforgiving message. Your account has been suspended due to a payment issue. A small, viciously satisfying smile touched my lips. My final target for the day was the car insurance, the invisible shield that made their carefree driving possible. I was the primary policyholder for all three of their vehicles. Mark's low-slung sports car, Jessica's massive luxury SUV, and their practical sedan. My long, spotless driving record gave them a significant multi-car discount. I had the policy documents in my folder. I called the insurance company's main line. Hello, I said to the polite young agent who answered. I'm Helen Miller, policy number 9B7-7-3. I need to make some significant changes to my policy. Certainly, Mrs. Miller. How can I help you today? I'd like to remove 2 drivers and their 3 associated vehicles from my plan, effective immediately. Another pause. This was clearly another highly unusual request for a Sunday afternoon. Ma'am, just to be clear, you want to remove all the vehicles and other drivers from your policy? That is correct. I will be keeping the policy active for myself, but I will not be listing any vehicles at this time. Just remove Mark Miller, Jessica Miller, and their 3 cars. Ma'am, the agent said, his voice now laced with caution. Removing them would leave them and their vehicles completely uninsured. Driving without insurance is illegal in the state of Texas. I'm perfectly aware of that, I said calmly. That will be their responsibility to sort out, won't it? Please proceed with the removal. I hung up the phone. The house was quiet, but in the digital world, a Category 5 hurricane was brewing. Payments were about to bounce. Services were about to be cut. Their legal right to be on the road was about to evaporate. Their carefully constructed world of comfort and convenience was about to crumble into dust. And the worst part for them? They wouldn't even know it was happening until it was too late. They were driving around in uninsured cars, living in a house that was about to go up for sale, blissfully unaware that the old woman in the basement had just burned their entire empire to the ground with a few clicks and a couple of phone calls. With the financial and legal wheels set in motion, a silent digital demolition of their lives, there was one final deeply personal task left on my list. This part wasn't about money or contracts. This was about reclaiming my physical space. This was about cleansing the house of their presence, not just for my own peace of mind, but as a clear, undeniable, and very public statement. This was the exclamation point at the end of a long, painful sentence. I looked up the number for a 24-hour emergency locksmith in Austin. I need a full house rekeying service, I told the man who answered, his voice groggy. All exterior doors. Front, back, and garage. How soon can you be here? It's a Sunday night, ma'am. It'll cost you extra, he said. The price is not an issue, I replied, the words tasting sweet. I need it done tonight. I can be there in an hour, he said, his voice suddenly much more awake. I'll see you then, I replied and hung up. 60 minutes. That's all the time I had. I went to the garage, a place I rarely entered, and found the stack of flattened cardboard boxes I'd saved from my own move into this prison. I began to assemble them, my hands working quickly, methodically, fueled by a righteous, burning energy. Then I went upstairs and I started my work. I started in their master suite, the nerve center of their arrogance. The room was a monument to their vanity and my stolen inheritance. A walk-in closet the size of my old bedroom was overflowing with their things. I didn't fold. I didn't pack with care. I grabbed armfuls of Mark's expensive tailored suits, the ones he wore to a job I wasn't even sure he had, and threw them into a box. His ridiculous collection of dozens of designer sneakers, each pair costing more than my monthly grocery bill, were unceremoniously tossed in after them, a jumble of leather and laces. Then I moved to Jessica's side. Dresses with the price tag still on them. A wall of high-heeled shoes that looked like instruments of torture. At least 20 different designer handbags, each one a status symbol bought with my sweat. I didn't treat them like prized possessions. I treated them like what they were, evidence of a crime. They were symbols of my stolen retirement, and I crammed them into black, heavy-duty garbage bags with a fury that felt cleansing. I worked my way through the house like a quiet, efficient storm. The home gym in the spare bedroom, with its expensive treadmill and stationary bike that were covered in a thin layer of dust. The office with its matching mahogany desks and high-tech gadgets still in their packaging. The family room with its ridiculously oversized television and a dozen different gaming consoles. Every personal item, every piece of clothing, every book on getting rich quick, every meaningless knick-knack that belonged to them was unceremoniously dumped into a box or a bag. By the time the locksmith's van pulled into the driveway, its headlights cutting through the darkness, I had a mountain of their life piled in the grand two-story foyer. The locksmith was a young man with kind eyes and a tired face. He looked at the chaos of boxes and bags, then at me, a determined, sweating 70-year-old woman in a nightgown and slippers. He didn't ask a single question. He just got out his tools and got to work. As he began to drill out the first lock on the front door, the loud, grinding noise echoing through the house, I started the final phase of my operation. I grabbed the first box, the one with Mark's suits, and with a grunt, I dragged it across the polished hardwood floor and pushed it out onto the front porch. Then another. And another. Box after box, bag after bag. I hauled their entire existence out of the house and deposited it on the front curb, right next to their perfectly manicured rose bushes. It was a spectacle, a pyramid of their greed, right there under the soft glow of the streetlights, for the entire neighborhood to see. The pristine suits, the Italian leather shoes, the gaudy handbags, all piled up like common trash awaiting the morning garbage truck. As I was dragging out a particularly heavy bag of Jessica's shoes, my neighbor Carol came out onto her porch, wrapping her robe around herself. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of shock and, I thought, a glimmer of profound understanding. She had seen the way they treated me. She had been on the receiving end of Jessica's poisonous lies. I looked over at her, my face grim with determination, my hair sticking to my forehead, and I gave her a single firm nod. She took in the scene, the mountain of stuff on the curb, the locksmith's van, the determined set of my jaw. And she nodded back. An unspoken, powerful alliance was formed across the perfectly manicured lawns of Oak Creek Lane. The sound of the drill was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It wasn't a sound of destruction. It was the sound of my chains being broken. One by one he replaced the locks. The front door. The back patio door. The door from the garage into the house. When he was finished, he handed me a small heavy ring of brand new shiny brass keys. They felt solid and real in my hand. "All set, ma'am," he said, wiping his brow. I paid him in cash, adding a tip so generous it made his tired eyes widen. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "You have no idea what you've done for me tonight." After his van disappeared down the street, I stood on my front porch for a long moment. I looked at the pile on the curb, then back at my front door. I stepped inside and with a deep sense of finality, I closed the door and turned the new deadbolt. The solid, satisfying thunk of the bolt sliding into its new home was the sound of the end of an era. I didn't leave a note. I didn't send a text message. The mountain of their belongings on the curb, a monument to their own arrogance, was the only explanation they would ever need or deserve. That evening, the house was cavernously empty and blessedly quiet. I walked into the kitchen, my kitchen, and opened the pantry door, which now swung freely on its hinges. I took out my favorite teacup and a tea bag. As the kettle heated, I stood by the window and looked out at the street. The sun had long set, and the pile of boxes and bags was a dark, hulking shape in the suburban darkness. It looked like a tombstone. A tombstone for the version of me that had allowed this to happen. For the first time in 6 long, miserable months, I felt something I thought I had lost forever. Peace. The peace lasted for about 3 hours. It was a profound, bone-deep quiet, the kind you only appreciate after enduring a long, grinding noise. It was just after 9 p.m. when I heard the arrogant, throaty roar of Mark's sports car turning into our quiet cul-de-sac. The sound was an intrusion, a violation of the newfound sanctity of my home. Headlights swept across my living room window, momentarily illuminating the room where I sat in my mother's rocking chair. A forgotten, half-empty cup of chamomile tea on the end table beside me. I didn't move. I didn't even flinch. I just sat and I waited. The queen on her throne, waiting for the disgraced courtiers to approach. The car door slammed shut with a sound of finality. Then another, a lighter, sharper sound, Jessica. I heard their footsteps on the driveway, Jessica's heels clicking an angry staccato rhythm on the concrete. Then an abrupt dead silence. I could picture them standing there perfectly, frozen in the glow of the porch light, staring in slack-jawed disbelief at the mountain of their possessions piled up on the curb like a public shaming. The first sound was a shriek. It was Jessica, a sound of pure, unadulterated outrage. What in the hell is this? What is going on? Then came the jingle of keys, a frantic fumbling sound, followed by the metallic scrape of the wrong key being forced into the new, unforgiving lock on the front door. Scrape. Rattle. Jiggle. Nothing. A fist pounded on the solid wood of the door. It was Mark. His voice when it came was a mixture of confusion and rage, the bewildered bellow of a spoiled child who had just had his favorite toy taken away. Mom, what is this? What did you do? Open this door right now. This isn't funny. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my now cold tea. The chamomile was supposed to be calming, but what I felt was far beyond calm. It was a state of absolute, unshakable resolve. Helen! Jessica screamed now, her voice so shrill I thought it might shatter the windows. I swear to God, you crazy old bat, you let us in right now or I'm calling the police. Do you hear me? Let her, I thought, a small grim smile touching my lips. Let her try to explain to the police why she thinks she has the right to break into a house she doesn't legally own. A house whose rightful co-owner has just locked her out. The thought was deeply, wickedly satisfying. Their assault on the house began in earnest. I heard them running around to the back patio door, rattling the handle with frantic, useless energy. Then to the garage door, pounding on the metal with their fists, the booming sound echoing through the house. Their panic was escalating, their disbelief turning into pure, sputtering fury. My Italian suits are out here on the wet grass. Mark bellowed from the front lawn, his voice cracking with indignation. Are you insane? This is thousands of dollars worth of stuff. Our inheritance. My thousands of dollars, I thought, taking another sip of tea. And the word inheritance, oh, that was rich. As if it were something they were owed, not something I had earned. After about 15 minutes of this futile, noisy chaos, the pounding stopped. I heard them whispering furiously to each other on the lawn. Then, the roar of the sports car engine again as Mark peeled out of the driveway with a squeal of tires that reeked of impotent rage. He left Jessica standing there alone, a solitary, furious figure amidst their pile of shame. He was probably going to find a hotel, leaving her to deal with the immediate fallout. A classic Mark move. I knew what was coming next. The legal threats. The manipulation. The attempts to paint me as a senile, vindictive monster. But I was ready. The moment his car was out of earshot, I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but Eleanor Vance, a bulldog of a woman in her 60s who had handled the complex sale of my bakery. She specialized in business and property law. And she took absolutely no prisoners. I had seen her reduce a corporate lawyer from a big Dallas firm to a stuttering mess during our negotiations. Eleanor, it's Helen Miller, I said when her answering service patched me through to her personal cell. Helen, it's nearly 10 o'clock on a Sunday. Is everything all right? I gave her the condensed, no-nonsense version. The public humiliation, the locked pantry, the discovery of the joint account, the draining of the funds, the revelation on the house deed, the locksmith, and the mountain of designer clothes currently sitting on my curb under the moonlight. There was a long, profound silence on the other end of the line. I thought for a moment I had finally shocked her. Then I heard a low, deep chuckle. "Well, damn, Helen," she said, her voice filled with something that sounded a lot like professional admiration. "You didn't just rattle the cage, you burned down the whole damn zoo. Good for you." "I need you to be ready, Eleanor," I said, my voice all business now. "They'll come at me with everything they've got. They'll try to say I'm incompetent." "Let them," she replied, her voice turning sharp and professional, the amusement gone. "You are a legal one-third owner of that property. You have every right to be there and to secure it. They, on the other hand, have been committing what sounds suspiciously like felony-level financial elder abuse and fraud for years. We will file the petition suit first thing in the morning. And you can bet your last dollar I'll be sending a letter via courier to whatever hotel Mark has checked into, and to his office, outlining the potential criminal charges he's facing if he doesn't cooperate. Don't you worry about a thing. You just sit tight and don't answer the door." We talked for another 20 minutes going over the strategy. I felt a profound sense of relief wash over me. A feeling of being protected, of having a powerful ally. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. As predicted, 2 days later a thick, creamy envelope arrived via courier. It was from a high-priced law firm downtown, the kind with 3 last names in their title. It was filled with blustering threats and wild accusations. It painted me as mentally unstable, vindictive, and abusive. It demanded immediate access to the house and the return of what it called Mark's essential business capital. I read it twice, letting the ridiculous, false words wash over me without leaving a mark. Then I scanned it and emailed it to Eleanor. Her reply came back in less than 5 minutes. It was a copy of the letter she had already sent to their lawyer. It was a masterpiece of legal brevity and brutality. It said, "All claims made by your clients are categorically rejected as frivolous and defamatory. Any attempt by your clients to access the property at 124 Oak Creek Lane will be considered criminal trespassing and will be reported to the Austin Police Department. My client, Helen Miller, is prepared to cooperate fully with a comprehensive third-party forensic accounting audit of the Helen Sweet Treats LLC bank account, dating back to its inception. I trust your clients are as well. We will see you in court for the petition hearing." The ball was in their court. And for the first time in a very long time, I knew with absolute unshakable certainty that I was the one holding all the aces. Their bluff had been called. The days that followed the great curb piling incident were a strange, surreal mix of profound silence and distant, chaotic noise. The silence was inside the house. A deep, calming, blessedly empty quiet that I hadn't realized I was so starved for. The noise was outside. The churning of the neighborhood rumor mill and the frantic, buzzing attempts of my son and his wife to regain control of a narrative that had spun wildly out of their grasp. The calls started the very next day. They came from block numbers, from numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't answer a single one. I let them all go to voicemail, creating a digital archive of their escalating desperation. I would listen to them later in the evenings, not out of any desire to connect, but out of a kind of morbid, anthropological curiosity. It was like listening to the death rattle of their arrogance. The first few were from Mark, his voice a tight coil of incredulous rage. "Pick up the phone, Mom. You have no idea the legal trouble you're in. You've gone way too far. You are going to regret this." Then, after Eleanor's blistering letter had obviously reached his very expensive lawyer, the tone shifted dramatically. The rage was replaced by a smoother, more calculated approach. It was a desperate, false sincerity that was almost more insulting than his anger. "Mom, come on. This is all just a big misunderstanding. We can talk this out. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Let's just sit down and be a family again." Family. The word was so obscene coming from his lips that I almost laughed out loud. Family doesn't lock you out of the pantry. Family doesn't scream at you in front of their friends. I deleted the message. My silence was my answer. It was a solid brick wall he couldn't breach, a weapon he didn't know how to fight. He was used to me reacting, crying, pleading. My complete and utter silence was driving him mad. The real-world consequences began to ripple through their lives with delicious speed, and whispers of it made their way back to me, mostly through my new friend and ally, Carol from next door. She would stop by in the afternoons, ostensibly to bring me my mail, but really to deliver the latest neighborhood intelligence report over a cup of my good Earl Grey tea. First it was the cars. Apparently, Mark had been pulled over for speeding, no doubt in a rage-fueled hurry, only for the officer to discover during the routine check that his vehicle was completely uninsured. The car wasn't just ticketed. It was impounded on the spot. Carol saw the tow truck herself from her kitchen window. "He looked like he was going to explode, Helen," she reported, her eyes twinkling with unrestrained glee. Then came the financial fallout. The story of Jessica's epic meltdown at the local Whole Foods became the stuff of legend in the Oak Creek Facebook group. Her credit card, the one linked to my now-drained account, was declined for a cart overflowing with organic produce, imported cheese, and kombucha. She had apparently screamed at the poor teenage cashier, accusing the store of having a faulty machine, before having to abandon the entire cart and storm out empty-handed, her face the color of a ripe tomato. Their carefully curated social standing, which they prized above all else, was crumbling like a dry cookie. Friends who had been at the barbecue, the same ones who had averted their eyes when I was being publicly humiliated, were now keeping their distance. No one wanted to be associated with the dramatic couple who had their belongings piled on the curb, and were now rumored to be in a nasty, vicious legal battle with their own elderly mother. They had become social pariahs. I, on the other hand, was slowly, deliberately, and joyfully reclaiming my life and my home. The first thing I did was hire a professional cleaning service to come in and deep clean the entire house from top to bottom, to scrub away every last trace of their energy, their scent, their presence. Then I began to make it my own. I went down to the basement, and with strength I didn't know I possessed, I dragged my mother's rocking chair back up the stairs. I spent a whole afternoon polishing the old oak with lemon oil until it gleamed, then placed it in the sunniest corner of the living room, right where it belonged. Sitting in it, gently rocking, felt like coming home after a long and terrible journey. The overwhelming sterile gray and beige color scheme that Jessica had insisted on was the next to go. I went to the hardware store and bought gallons of warm buttery yellow paint for the kitchen and a soft calming sage green for the living room. I put on old records from my collection, Frank Sinatra, Ella Fitzgerald, the music of my youth, and I sang along at the top of my lungs as I painted. I hadn't sung in years. And then I started baking again. The scent of cinnamon, apples, and melting butter, a scent that had been declared heavy and unwelcome, once again filled the kitchen. I baked my mother's apple pie, not for anyone else but for me. I baked scones and cookies in fresh, crusty bread. The house, which had been silenced and sterilized by Jessica's modern aesthetic, was once again filled with the smells of love and comfort. It smelled like my home. One afternoon, Carol stopped by while I was pulling a batch of chocolate chip cookies out of the oven. The whole house was fragrant with the smell of melted chocolate and vanilla. "My goodness, Helen," she said, inhaling deeply as she stepped inside. "It smells like absolute heaven in here. And the whole house, it feels different. It feels lighter." "It is lighter, Carol," I said, handing her a warm, gooey cookie. "About 350 pounds lighter, give or take." We sat in the living room, me in my mother's rocker, her on the sofa, and we talked for hours. For the first time I told her everything, every painful detail. She listened, her kind face shifting from shock to anger to deep, profound sympathy. "That girl," she said, shaking her head after I had finished, "is a piece of work. A real viper. And Mark, I'm so sorry, Helen. To be betrayed by your own child. There's no pain like it." "I'm not the same woman I was a month ago, Carol," I told her, and I was surprised to find how deeply I meant it. That woman was willing to be invisible just to keep the peace. She was willing to swallow her pain and pretend everything was okay. This woman is done being quiet. The legal battle wasn't over. I knew the fight ahead would be ugly and draining, but in the quiet moments in my reclaimed, sun-drenched home, surrounded by the smell of baking and the warmth of a new and true friendship, I felt like I had already won the only war that truly mattered. I had won myself back. The legal battle was exactly as ugly and draining as I had anticipated. Mark and Jessica's lawyer tried every trick in the book to delay and intimidate. They filed motion after motion, claiming I was mentally incompetent and suffering from delusions, demanding a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation. Eleanor, my glorious legal bulldog, shut that down so fast their lawyers' heads spun. She presented the court with a glowing affidavit from my primary care physician of 20 years, along with a dozen character witness statements from old friends, former employees, and even the head of the local business association, all attesting to my sharp mind and sound judgment. The judge dismissed their motion with a barely concealed look of disgust. They tried to claim the money in the joint account was solely from Mark's booming consulting business. Eleanor countered by subpoenaing their personal and business tax returns for the past 5 years. The documents were damning. They showed Mark's so-called business had reported consistent losses, year after year. Their declared income couldn't possibly support their lavish lifestyle. The numbers didn't lie, they screamed fraud. The forensic accounting audit I had agreed to was a sword hanging over their heads. The partition suit for the house was the final, inescapable checkmate. Faced with a court-ordered sale where the house would likely sell for less at auction, and confronted with the overwhelming, documented evidence of their financial fraud, they were finally forced to the negotiation table. The mediation was held in a sterile, soulless conference room in Eleanor's office building. I saw them for the first time since that night. They didn't look me in the eye. They looked small and petty and defeated. In the end, they had no choice. They had to agree to sell the house on the open market and buy me out of my 1/3 share at its full appraised value. They also had to sign an ironclad agreement, drafted by Eleanor, formally acknowledging that the entirety of the funds from the LLC account were my sole property. In exchange for that, and for them walking away without another penny, I agreed not to pursue criminal charges for elder financial abuse. It was a bitter, humiliating pill for them to swallow. But their lawyer knew they were staring down the barrel of a possible felony conviction. They signed. Selling the house, the gilded cage, felt like shedding a final layer of dead skin. With the proceeds from the sale and my reclaimed, now securely protected retirement funds, I bought a beautiful light-filled 2-bedroom condo in a quieter, greener part of Austin. It had a large balcony perfect for a container garden and a modern kitchen that was all mine. My name was the only one on the deed. It was my sanctuary. I spent the next year truly living for the first time since Robert had passed away. I joined a pottery class and discovered I had a knack for it, my old baker's hands finding joy in the cool, yielding clay. I started volunteering twice a week at the local library, surrounded by books and quiet purpose. And I traveled. I took a train trip through the Rockies. I flew to New England to see the autumn leaves, something Robert and I had always talked about doing. I sent postcards to Carol from every stop. I was making new friends, people who knew me simply as Helen, the interesting woman with a passion for classic films and a surprisingly dirty laugh, not as Mark's mother. The silence from Mark and Jessica was absolute. After the legal papers were signed and the money was transferred, the calls and messages stopped completely. They had vanished from my life, and the gaping hole I thought they would leave was instead filled with sunlight, and peace, and the sound of my own quiet contentment. Then, about a year and a half after I had last seen their defeated faces in that conference room, our paths finally inevitably crossed. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was at Central Market, my favorite grocery store, a place of beautiful produce and happy chaos. I was standing in the produce section, trying to decide between a bag of heirloom tomatoes and some lovely vine-ripened ones. I was wearing a brightly colored scarf I'd bought in Vermont, and I felt happy. Genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy. As I turned my cart to head towards the checkout, I saw him. It was Mark. He was standing near the deli counter, holding a plastic container of potato salad. He looked thin and tired. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by a rumpled polo shirt and slacks that didn't fit quite right. The arrogant, confident swagger was gone, replaced by a permanent slump in his shoulders. He looked older, worn down by a life that no longer came with an effortless automatic payment plan. He saw me at the same moment. His eyes widened and he froze, the container of potato salad held awkwardly in his hand. A whole symphony of emotions crossed his face in a split-second: shock, shame, fear, and then a desperate, pathetic sliver of hope. He looked like a little boy again, caught with his hand in the cookie jar, hoping his mother would somehow make it all okay. He stood there motionless, waiting for me to make the first move, waiting for a sign, a word, a nod of acknowledgement that would let him off the hook. The old Helen, the Helen who had baked his birthday cakes and kissed his scraped knees, would have felt a sharp, gut-wrenching pang of pity. She would have felt the powerful primal pull of a mother's instinct to fix what was broken in her child. But I was not that Helen anymore. That Helen had died on a sunny afternoon at a barbecue. I looked at him, this stranger who wore my son's face, and I felt nothing. It was the most profound and liberating feeling of my life. No anger, no sadness, no lingering love, no smoldering hate. It was like looking at a piece of furniture I had once owned and had long since discarded. It held no emotional weight. It was just an object from the past. I did not smile. I did not scowl. I did not nod. I simply turned my cart, its wheels squeaking softly on the polished concrete floor, and pushed it towards the checkout line as if he wasn't there. As if he was nothing more than a ghost, a figment of a past life that no longer had anything to do with me. I paid for my tomatoes, walked out into the warm Texas sunshine, and loaded my groceries into my car. I never once looked back. I knew in that moment of profound and utter indifference that I was finally, completely, and irrevocably free. The war hadn't ended in a courtroom with a lawyer's signature. It ended on a Tuesday afternoon in the produce aisle of a grocery store. It ended not with a bang, and not with a whimper, but with a quiet, powerful, and liberating silence. That night, I sat on the balcony of my new condo. The million lights of Austin twinkled below me, a beautiful sprawling galaxy of a million other lives, a million other stories. I had a glass of crisp Sauvignon Blanc in my hand and a pot of blooming defiant pink bougainvillea next to me, thriving in the warm Texas air. I thought about the encounter at the grocery store, about the hollowed-out look in Mark's eyes, the ghost of the boy I once loved. For so long, for 40 long years, I believed my primary job as a mother was to give my son the world. I thought the greatest inheritance I could leave him was financial security, the thriving bakery, the money from its sale, the safety net of a home. I thought my legacy would be the things I could provide for him. I was so profoundly, devastatingly wrong. The real inheritance, the one that truly matters, isn't something you can leave to someone else in a will. It's the one you have to fight for, bleed for, and claim for yourself. My inheritance is peace. It's the peace of waking up in the morning in a home where I am not a guest, not a burden. It's the peace of drinking a cup of coffee from any mug I choose without wondering if it's the wrong one. It's the peace of knowing that my financial security is in my own hands, protected by my own vigilance, not being steadily bled dry to fund someone else's vanity and sense of entitlement. The victory wasn't in taking the money back, though there was a certain satisfaction in that. The money was just a tool, a means to an end. The true victory was in the reclamation of my own worth. It was in the profound late-in-life understanding that love and respect are not transactions. You don't earn them by sacrificing every piece of yourself on the altar of familial obligation. They are either given freely and honestly or they are not real. What I had with my son wasn't a relationship. It was a long-term, one-sided investment with no returns. A few months after the grocery store incident, one final message appeared on my phone. It was from a number I didn't have saved, but I knew instantly who it was from. The message was short, just 3 words that I had once longed to hear more than anything in the world. "I'm sorry, Mom." I stared at the words on the screen. A year ago they might have shattered me. They might have opened a crack in the wall I had so painstakingly built around my heart. A tiny fissure for hope and old pain and a toxic sense of obligation to seep through. But now they were just words. An echo from a distant, irrelevant shore. An apology offered far too late, for wounds that had long since scarred over and healed into something stronger than the original skin. It wasn't my responsibility to accept it. It wasn't my job to absolve him, to make him feel better about the man he had become. My only job now, my sacred duty, was to protect my own hard-won peace. I held my finger down on the message. A small menu popped up on the screen. I pressed the button that said delete. And just like that, with a simple silent tap of my finger, he was gone again, this time for good. The greatest and hardest lesson I learned in my 70th year on this earth is this. Sometimes the most powerful act of love is not holding on tighter, but letting go completely. Sometimes the bravest thing you can possibly do is to stop setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Your dignity is not negotiable. Your peace is not a bargaining chip. Your life is your own. My legacy won't be a bakery or a bank account. My legacy is this story. It's the lesson that it is never ever too late to stand up and say, with a clear voice and a steady heart, no more. It's the truth that your value is not determined by how useful you are to others, but by the love and respect you finally, unapologetically, and triumphantly give to yourself. Thank you so much for listening to my story all the way through. It wasn't easy to tell, but it was important for me to share. My question for you all is this. Have you ever had to make a difficult, painful choice to protect your own peace and dignity from someone you loved? Let me know in the comments below, because I truly believe our stories are how we heal and help each other feel less alone. And if my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more. You are not alone.